about to read another chapter from By the Book by Lori Cole and Mishell Baker. This is Chapter 17, Snare and Escape. After doing her chores, Wren spent the rest of the morning showing Otto how to play jackstraws. He was terrible at it, his clumsy fingers knocking the whole pile of sticks into disarray every time he tried to pick one up. He didn't seem to mind, though. He just gave her the same goofy, patient smile every time she won, and gestured that he wanted to play again. It was hard to believe that he and Crusher were the same species. Unfortunately, the sheriff interrupted them just before noon, shooing Wren off the porch. "Otto," he said, "no time for games now. Gerda's got an order for Hilda, and I need you to take it to her right away. You know how the missus gets when she has to wait." "I'll do it," Wren offered. "I've got nothing else to do today." Somewhat reluctantly, the sheriff agreed. Wren took the slip of paper from him and set off to the town center as fast as her legs could carry her. Who'd have thought she'd get to do an errand for the sheriff of Siegburg? Hilda, unfortunately, was out of turnips, which figured prominently in Mrs. Meisterson's order. Wren promised to fetch her some from the farm, then dashed back to the sheriff's porch to relay the news. Sheriff Meisterson watched Wren with a disapproving eye as she left town by herself through the west gate. She hoped he wouldn't mention her leaving town to her brothers, but she could always say she was just trying to help the sheriff. What could they say to that? Wren balanced her way down the rut in the western road, wondering where Heinrich was today. Hilda had said he was probably at the edge of his property starting to plant the oats. Surely he'd be in a better mood when he found out that he had a nice big order from the sheriff's wife. Wren set out across the freshly plowed field at a jog. "I'll start at the far end and work my way to the farmhouses," she decided. "I'm sure to find Heinrich somewhere along the way." As she trotted along the edge of the field, she could see a small trail leading into the forest. Hoof prints in the soft dirt showed that a large centaur had come to and from the trail, but there were no tracks on the trail itself. It's as though the tracks had been deliberately brushed away. Wren paused, intrigued, and suddenly realized that she could hear the soft sounds of a struggle off in the bush. Her curiosity fully piqued, Wren followed the trail into the woods. About 50 feet into the forest, Wren discovered the sound of the source of the noise. She cried aloud in dismay as she saw her friend, the red fox. The poor animal was suspended some 4 feet off the ground by a rope caught around its back foot, and it was clearly in pain. Wren approached the struggling animal cautiously. "Easy, easy there," she said softly to the fox. "You're only going to hurt yourself worse." The fox struggled violently for a moment, snarling at Wren. Then it laid its ears and looked at her, seeming to relax. "Let me try to get you down," Wren said. "I'll just climb the tree up a bit and loosen the rope." The fox watched her every move as she climbed up into the bough of the oak from which the rope was hanging. Wren tried to pry the knot loose with her fingers, but it had been tied too securely. She pulled out the dagger she'd gotten from the brigands. Al had insisted that Hawk give it to her, since Al had promised her a dagger after all. Wren sawed at the knot while holding on to the rope with her other hand. The fox was heavier than it looked, and Wren was glad that she had a good grip on the rope when the knot finally parted. "Okay, watch it now," she said. "I'm going to lower you to the ground." When the fox reached the ground, it curled up and started gnawing at the rope on its leg. Wren climbed down the tree and squatted near the fox. "You'd better let me do it," she said to it. As she reached towards the fox, it tensed slightly. "We're friends, remember?" she said. "I'm going to get that rope off your foot." The fox looked dubious, and Wren just shook her head and grinned. "Boy, wait till I tell the chief thief about this." The fox stopped suddenly and looked at her for a moment, then offered up its leg, a peculiarly human gesture. Wren was pleased but baffled. She reached out slowly to touch the fox's leg, ready to jerk back if it tried to snap at her. The fox seemed strangely calm now, however. Wren slowly worked the knot loose from the fox's leg, wincing as her fingers touched the raw, oozing scrapes. The animal didn't even blink, however, as she painstakingly removed the rope. "There," she said with satisfaction. "You'll be fine now." The fox cocked its ears forward and opened its mouth slightly, making a strange sound. "Sss, it's all right," Wren said reassuringly. "You'll be okay now." The fox shook its head as though bothered by a fly. "Sank!" It licked its teeth as though something was caught in them. "Sank!" Wren stared at the fox in amazement. She wasn't sure, but it sounded like the fox had just attempted to speak to her. "Sank?" Wren asked. "Sank you." The fox licked its lips again, as though trying to talk made its mouth itch. "Thank you?" repeated Wren. "You mean thank you?" Her face suddenly flushed with excitement. "You can talk! You can understand me!" The fox made a tremendous yawn, stretching its jaw open widely. Then it shook its head, squeezing its eyes shut as if in concentration. "Friend," it struggled to say. "Help?" Wren was thrilled at the possibility. "Sure, I'll help. What do you want me to do?" The fox stood up, testing its injured hip, and then slowly hobbled down the trail to a dusty section of ground. There, it began to scratch in the dust with its front paw. It drew 3 sides of a box, then capped it with an upside-down V. "That looks like a house," Wren said. Forgetting the pain in its leg, the fox started hopping around in an excited dance of agreement. Then it turned to the drawing and, concentrating fiercely, scratched 2 vertical lines coming from the bottom of the house. "Is that the road to the house?" Wren asked. The fox shook its head and tried to speak. "Ba-ga-ya-ya-ya. Ba-ga-ya-ya-ya." The fox laid its ears against its head in frustration, then drew 2 more small upside down V's at the end of the vertical line. "Ba-ga-ya?" Wren repeated. "I don't get that." "Okay, so it isn't a road, it's a house, and there's something under the house. Or is it something holding the house up?" The fox did a little dance and then tapped its good hind leg on the ground. It tried to stand up on its hind legs, winced, dropped back on all 4s, then tapped its foot on the ground again. "A dancing house?" The fox flattened itself against the ground with a look of utter exasperation, then rolled over, waving its injured leg in the air. "Is your leg still hurt? I could get some healing salve from my brother." "Yeg!" the fox yipped excitedly. It rolled over and pointed at the lines of the house with its paw, one by one. "Yeg! Yeg!" it repeated, looking at Wren intently. "You mean those lines under the house are legs?" Wren asked doubtfully. "They kind of look like chicken legs more than, chicken feet more than legs." The fox began to jump around joyfully. Chicken seat. Ooze chicken seat. "The house has chicken feet?" Wren shook her head when the fox nodded vigorously in assent. "I've never seen a house like that, and I've pretty much explored all the town by now." The fox just shook its head. "Yick, isa yick." Wren just shrugged and spread her hands in confusion. "Yake, yake." The fox shook its head in frustration, then its ears perked back up. "Yeg," it said, shaking its front leg. Then he pointed with his paw towards the southeast. "Yake." Wren worked through this line of thought. Yeg, leg, yake, lake? You mean that lake? Bagel something or other? The fox nodded vigorously. "Yake. House ficken seat is a yake. Kiss, Takis, has an kiss, kills, Swiss. The fox lay down panting as though it was exhausted by this effort to communicate. The house with the chicken feet is by the lake. I got that part, Wren said. I don't get the part about the kiss, though. Where's that cliff? Southeast. Cliff? Does any of that mean what you're saying? The fox nodded. Then its ears drooped, and it looked at Wren mournfully with its large amber eyes. Bad has. Bad yedi yeven has. Man go has. Man. Yadi do bad sings. The fox snarled and waved a front paw wildly, then stabbed it in Wren's direction. Yike that! Man-made socks! Okay. It's a bad house with a bad lady who lives in the house by the cliff, Wren said excitedly. And a man went to the house and the lady made the man some socks? The fox snarled. The fox just lay down on the ground and put his paws over its head. It made strange snorting noises as its body shook all over. Wren could have sworn it was laughing. After a moment, the fox took a little panting breath and tried again. Socks, socks, me, it said, trying to point its paw at itself. Your name is Socks? The fox started to laugh again. Suddenly, Wren understood. You mean the lady made the man a fox? Her eyes grew round. You? She made you into a fox? You mean like magic? You are a man? The fox nodded. Help Socks. Wren sat for a moment beside herself with astonishment. Nothing like this had ever happened in Alpendorf. Sure, I'll help you, Socks, she said with a grin. What can I do? The fox seemed to concentrate for a moment before it started to speak. Papa. Tell Papa. You want me to tell your papa something, she replied. Who is your papa? Papa cease. The fox shook its head and closed its eyes. The effort to shape human words with its vulpine mouth was obvious. Tis, tis, tis. Gid? Tis gid? Cheese? Teeth? No, all right. Tis gid? Thieves guild? Wren looked at the fox with astonishment. Your father is the chief thief of the Thieves' Guild? The fox danced excitedly around Wren. Then abruptly it froze in place. Its ears pricked forward as if listening for something. Then it quickly turned and bolted away. Wait! What's wrong? Wren watched it disappear into the underbrush, then looked to see what had made it run. The thud of approaching hoofbeats reminded her that she had freed the fox from what much it might have been and was probably Heinrich's trap. Wren grabbed the rope, hid it behind her back, and tried to look normal. Heinrich trotted towards her along the trail. You! He said in astonishment as he recognized Wren standing there. What are you doing there? Where is my trap? Wren took a deep breath. I was coming to give you a message from Hilda that she needed more turnips at the stand, and I saw a fox hanging from the tree. She held out the rope. I'd never seen a fox on a rope before, so I stopped to watch. It sort of jumped up and bit the rope on its leg, and then it ran off. So I climbed up and got the rope. Heinrich glared and snatched the rope from her. I'd better not see you near my farm again, young man, or that might not be the last fox you see dangling from a tree. He snorted, reared, and then broke into a trot. Don't forget the turnips, she yelled after him. He snorted in response, then galloped away toward the farm. Wren breathed a sigh of relief, then felt her excitement bubbling up again. She had a sure-fire ticket into the Thieves' Guild now. Al retreated to his room to study his spells shortly after finishing his morning tea. While practicing the Perceive rune spell with his book lying open on the table, Al made an exciting discovery. As it turned out, he didn't need to go to Rana's piece to see the runes in his book. All he had to do was cast the Perceive spell before looking at the book, and the abecediary couplets would disappear, replaced on each page by a rune. Delighted with his discovery, he spent the day carefully studying the runes. There was something odd about them that made them harder to memorize than ordinary symbols. He made a special effort to ensure that he didn't forget the rune for fire, since he recognized it as part of the spell on the kobold's disc. The design was made up of the runes for fire, spell, and one other rune he couldn't identify. It had a long, angular shape, almost like an arrow, but nothing happened when he tried out the meaning arrow. Still, Howell was satisfied with his day's accomplishment, with the exception of one thing. Even after a full day of pondering the problem, Al couldn't think of a single way to make the trip to Siegburg without either a guide or more explicit directions. There was only one person he knew of that could give him directions, and as much as he dreaded facing that arrogant she, he eventually gave in to the necessity. Just as the sun was beginning to sink from its zenith, Al left his room and made his way towards the northern section of the town. Perhaps Zara could also unravel the mysterious rune spell on the kobold's necklace, if he could even get her to speak with him. When he arrived at the magic shop, the door had reappeared on the front of the building. There was no handle, however, and it did not give in to pressure. "Zara?" he called through the door. "May I enter?" There was no response. Knowing that he risked Zara's displeasure, but deciding it was worth the price, Al used his open spell to let himself into the shop. Zara stood waiting for him on the dais, the splendid lines of her face taut with irritation. Damiano, on the pedestal behind her, drew his lips back in a contemptuous snarl. "Why?" Zara demanded. "Have you disturbed me?" "Forgive my rudeness, Zara, but I need of knowledge that only you possess, and I wish to offer you what service I may in return." Zara turned to address Damiano. "What service could one such as he possibly provide?" she said, just loudly enough for Al to hear. "He has already performed the only task of which he is capable, and he had the temerity to ask for a reward." Damiano beat his wings against the smoky air, launching itself from the pedestal to land on Zara's shoulder. Then they both turned to face him with matching expressions of withering disdain. "I assure you," said Al, quelling a sudden spark of anger, "that my abilities have improved since we last spoke. I was able to aid my brother in defeating the kobold who has been setting fires in the town, for example. I am certain that someone of your greatness would be able to put my limited talents to use." Zara's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Why have you need of me? Was Erasmus unable to help you in this matter?" Al paused. He had the feeling that to admit his failure would be to turn his back on a pack of wolves. Zara studied him as though she could sense his weakness. "You did go to Erasmus, did you not?" Forcing away his unease, Al slowly shook his head. "This is one of the questions I wish to ask you," he said mildly. "I was hoping you could give me more detailed directions to Siegburg." Zara stood up straighter, drawing in a long breath through suddenly pinched nostrils. Al couldn't imagine what he had said to make her look so angry. When she spoke Next, however, it was to Damiano. "You see what a fool he is," she said mildly. "Zauberberg couldn't have been easier to spot, as if it were on fire." Al fidgeted despite himself. "I look to the northeast," he said to his hands. "However, my eyes perhaps do not have the acuity that yours do at such distances." Suddenly, though Zara stood a good 10 feet from him, Al felt his head forced upward, as though she had reached under his chin. She stared into his eyes across the room, and a cruel smile crossed her face. "You would be better named as Bat," she purred. Al had thought such taunts could no longer bother him, but this something in her eyes that made his spine go stiff with humiliation. With an effort, he forced himself to relax. "You can see why I have need of clear directions," he said. "I see very clearly," said Zara dryly, causing Damiano to snicker. "What I do not see is why this little matter concerns me." Al repressed a sigh. "There is little I can do for you in return, except perhaps you have a use for this token I picked up from the kobold." He held up the rune necklace. Damiano took a flight across the room towards him, snatching the rock disc out of Al's hand before he could react. Obediently, the little creature returned to his mistress, offering her the rune spell. She glanced at it, then frowned. "It is nothing more than a flame dart spell." Flame dart? Could the other rune mean dart? Desperately, Al tried to conjure up the image of the third rune, but to his dismay he found it already fading from his mind. Zara passed her hand over the glassy disc, and her eyes lost focus. "Used by a kobold," she murmured. "Created by Baba Yaga and given as a gift." She turned to Damiano, speaking in a more conversational tone. "Baba Yaga! So this kobold dared to call on the hut of Fowl's legs? Interesting." "Who is Baba Yaga?" interrupted Al without thinking. Zara quickly turned to Al, her eyes dark with anger. "It is better for you that you never know the answer to that question, human." "But I've given you information," pointed out Al hopefully. "Might I have the directions in return?" Zara just gave him a long stare that made him feel as though his bones had turned to ice. Only when she looked at Damiano did he find he was able to move. He turned away, realizing the futility of his errand. Zara spoke sharply. "I did not dismiss you." Al turned back to watch her as she put a hand on Damiano's head, gazing into the creature's luminous red eyes. An almost trance-like state came over both Zara and Damiano, and Al realized that somehow she and her familiar were in a deep, wordless communication. He was surprised by the sudden twinge of envy. "You must go beyond the eastern bridge outside of town," Zara intoned, "then turn to the north. Continue in that direction, keeping Siegburg Castle on your left, until you leave it far behind you. At that point, you should come to the meadow with a fairy ring in the center. Head eastward from there to the edge of the mountains. Turn due north, and you will know when you have reached the foot of Zauberberg." With that, she released Damiano. Al bowed quickly, backing towards the door. "I thank you for your assistance," he said. "If you ever have any need of any menial tasks, please send word to me at the Hero's Tail Inn, and I'll be happy to assist you." "I have no further need for you as you are now," said Zara frostily. "Speak to Erasmus. Learn what you can from him, and then perhaps you will be more useful to me." Al moved to go, then stopped. A question burned in his gut, but he dreaded to ask. The way she pounced on his every show of fear and weakness sickened him. But no one else knew what the first thing about Erasmus, and Al had to know what to expect. Would you say, he began uncertainly, would you say that Erasmus is more of a, that is to say, is he? Zara gave an unpleasant smile. Erasmus is a terrible, terrible wizard, she said slowly, as though relishing the words. All who enter his tower rue the day they heard his name. Now be gone! Al hurried to the front door before Zara could send him into the street. As he shut the door behind him, he was unable to repress a shudder. It's only because Hawk took my cloak, he said himself. It's only because of the cold. Falcon returned to the inn just after sunset to find Shima serving Wren and Al supper. Where's Hawk? He asked anxiously. I was waiting for him outside town to practice swordplay, and finally the sheriff had to close the gate. Hawk never showed up. I haven't seen him since morning, replied Wren as she started to eat her stew. Shima set a place at the table for Falcon. He hesitated, then sat down, too hungry to wait. Wren offered him a slice of bread, which he gratefully munched while awaiting his own meal. Where could he be? He wondered aloud between bites. Al took a sip of his tea, then blew on it to cool it. Perhaps he had a bath and he's dressing, he suggested. I'll go check. Falcon trudged up the stairs and went over to listen at Hawk's door. A familiar rasping sound rumbled from inside. He's asleep, Falcon said with astonishment. I can hear him snoring. Oh, it's a wonder we didn't hear him down here, piped up Wren, racing up the stairs two at a time to join Falcon. Hawk, are you all right? Falcon called through the keyhole. Hearing a low moan, Falcon quickly tried to open the door, but it was barred on the inside. Hawk, are you hurt? He called. Go away, came the muffled reply. I don't feel well. Falcon frowned with concern. Hawk, if you're really sick, I have a healing potion here. It'll cure just about anything. There was a pause before Hawk answered. I just need sleep. You slept all day, accused Wren. No wonder you feel sick. Hawk yawned loud enough to be heard through the door. Wake me when it's time for supper. Wren glanced at Falcon and giggled. It's supper time now, Hawk, explained Falcon patiently. Wren and Al are already eating. There was a confused silence. How did it get so late? Because you were sleeping, dopey, shouted Wren. Falcon didn't understand it. Yesterday, Hawk was triumphant about having saved Siegburg from the kobold. Today, he couldn't even drag himself out of bed. Couldn't he find a middle ground somewhere? At last, the door opened. Your hair looks just like a caddis, giggled Wren as Hawk emerged from the room and followed them downstairs. Hawk gave a lopsided grin, then mussed Wren's hair with both hands. There! Now you look worse than me. Rubbing his eyes, he plopped down at the main table and began eating off of Al's plate. Falcon hesitated for a moment, then decided he couldn't keep it to himself any longer. Hawk, I have something important to tell you, he said, sitting across from his brother tensely. Said Hawk, with his mouth full of bread. Barnard isn't dead, Falcon blurted. I think he's under enchantment. Everyone turned to gape at Falcon, and he felt his face flush. Explain, said Al curtly. Okay, said Falcon, taking a deep breath. Yesterday, after the kobold, when I stank a bear, Barnard's horse greeted me like a long-lost brother. Now, the only person that horse has ever liked was Barnard. So I started to wonder, what if the bear was Barnard. What? Gasped Hawk, turning pale. That's impossible. Falcon shook his head. It's not. Amelia talked about a spellcaster who cursed the valley and knew all kinds of dark magic, possibly even how to turn people into animals. Suddenly, Wren sat up very straight, listening intensely. Owl, too, looked thoughtful. Zara said that the kobold was acquainted with a spellcaster called Baba Yaga. Unaccountedly, Wren gave a little squeak. Hey, I got some... Hawk casually put his hand over Wren's mouth. Shh, he interrupted. I want to hear what Owl and Falcon are saying. So, you think Baba Yaga turned Barnard into a bear and then gave the bear to the kobold? Owl nodded slowly. It does seem possible. Zara knows for a fact that Baba Yaga gave the kobold at least one gift, he noted, although we're not sure why. I don't know enough about the kobold's history to speculate. The most important thing, though, said Falcon, is that the healer said there was such a thing as a dispel potion. If we could make that, we could use it to turn Barnard into a man. What's a dispel potion? Asked Hawk, fully alert now. And how much does it cost? We're going to have to find the ingredients, said Falcon. The healer didn't have them. What kind of ingredients? Falcon racked his brain. Magic from the earth, air, fire, and water. Then she needed something from the victim before and after he was changed. That sounds way too complicated, said Hawk, letting go of Wren with a sigh. It's too bad we can't just go to Baba Yaga and make her change him back. Owl shrugged. There's no way to know where she is, assuming she's still in the valley. I know where Baba Yaga is, Wren exclaimed. Sure you do, said Hawk sarcastically. Falcon barely heard Wren. Hawk, he said severely, we shouldn't be thinking that way. Why not try and make the potion? You've got no business tangling with a spellcaster. I could handle it, Hawk said stubbornly. Wren pounded her fist on the table. I do so know where Baba Yaga's chicken-legged hut is. There was a silence as Owl turned to Wren with a raised eyebrow. Chicken-legged? Yeah, it's on a cliff east of the big lake, she said, clearly delighted by all the attention. It stands on chicken's feet. And Baba Yaga does know how to change people into animals. She does it all the time. Hawk shook his head. Wren, you shouldn't joke about stuff like this. See if I'm joking, she said, folding her arms. Owl was staring at Wren intently. Zara said something about a hut on fowl's legs. I don't know how it's possible, but Wren may be telling the truth. I know how to find out things, said Wren mysteriously. East of the lake, you said. Hawk's eyes were alight with purpose and excitement. Hawk, please, said Falcon, feeling a chill of dread. If Baba Yaga is the one who cursed this place, we need to leave her alone. Ignoring Falcon, Hawk jumped up from his chair, grabbed Wren, and swung her around. You little fox! Wren just squealed in delight. I knew she'd be good for something, said Hawk, kissing her forehead. Our little spy! Falcon just put his head down on his arms, overcome with despair. He should never, never have opened his mouth. This time, Wren didn't bother to wait for Hawk to start snoring. She knew he probably wouldn't get to sleep for a long time, considering how much he slept that day. He wouldn't think of checking up on her, though, so it really didn't matter as long as she was quiet. As she opened up the bedroom window, she could barely stop herself from leaping down. She couldn't wait until the chief found out what she knew. Once Wren's feet hit the cobblestones, she sprinted all the way through the dark streets to the tavern. She searched the nearby alleys and streets for a while, but to her disappointment, she didn't see Bruno or Sneak anywhere. She'd need their help if the chief had change the password. Maybe she could find a guild thief drinking at the tavern. Wren opened the tavern door a crack and heard lots of chatter and yelling. She opened it a couple of inches more, just enough to see inside. There was a small, frantic group of men near the bar, leaping half out of their chairs as they placed coins down on the table. Even Berthold had his piggy eyes set on the action behind the bar. Wren only recognized Crusher and the bartender. No one else looked like a thief. One bearded man closed his eyes and muttered to himself for a moment, then threw something that tumbled noisily across the surface of the table. There was a pause as the other man leaned over to look, and then groaned. The bearded man laughed triumphantly and reached down to take the coins off the middle of the table. Wren had no idea what was going on. She started to enter anyway, then hesitated. What if the chief had told Berthold that she wasn't really a thief? "Out of the way," came a gruff voice from behind her. Wren turned to see the approach of a big, bull-faced man, his pot-belly covered with his filthy apron. Judging from his rank smells that wafted from his clothing, it was the local butcher. Obviously, he didn't bother to wash up after work. Wren ducked out of his way, trying not to gag. The man barreled past Wren. Holding her nose, she followed right behind him as he headed for the noisy group at the table. She kept the butcher between herself and Berthold until she could duck behind another table and crawl her way carefully over to Crusher. Now what? She thought to herself, grimacing at the feel of the sticky floor as she crawled across it. I may not know the new password, but I could try to bluff my way in. That is, if Crusher is smart enough to be bluffed. As she crawled closer, Crusher turned and snarled. Apparently, he wasn't delighted to see her. "Schwarzfisch," she said, sitting back on her heels. Crusher's huge mouth drew up in a grin that was even scarier than his attempt to look menacing. He reached out to grab her. No, said Wren quickly. "I forgot. They changed it the last time I was here." Wren did her best to look like she was trying to remember something. Crusher just glared at her and put his hands back down at his sides. Now, what was it? Let me think. She racked her brain for a second. Maybe it was something similar. Goldfish? From the way Crusher smiled, Wren could tell she was wrong. No, that wasn't it, she said hurriedly. Oh, wait, it's coming to me. I think I can remember. Crusher's smile faded. Nothing was coming to mind. She looked up at Crusher with her sweetest smile. "Can you give me a hint?" she asked beguilingly. Crusher only growled, cracked his knuckles, and started to reach for her again. "Foxfish!" she said in desperation. Crusher grabbed her by the hair and hauled her toward the door, teeth bared in pleasure. No, wait, please," Wren said as she scuttled madly to keep her hair from being torn out by the roots. "I've got to talk to the chief thief. It's really important. It's about his son." Ignoring her completely, Crusher threw her out on the street. This time she skidded a bit on her feet before falling. The right knee of her trousers gave way with a nasty ripping sound, and she winced. Brushing herself off, she sighed. It looks like the only way she'd ever get to talk to the chief would be if she were invited. She'd have to find Bruno again.